Hi everyone, it's Monday at 1 o'clock Eastern Time and this is Admissions Live. I am your host Nikki Lentine, and today on the show I am speaking with Eliza Dyer, Senior Admissions Counselor at the University of Vermont, to recap this year's annual meeting and conference for the New England Association for College Admissions Counseling. Admissions Live is part of the Higher Ed Live Network, a series of professional development web shows and podcasts which are always free and accessible to you in the archives at higheredlive.com and on iTunes. Be a part of our broadcast by tuning in live and sharing your insights and questions using the Higher Ed Live hashtag on Twitter. You can receive weekly updates with live show dates and times by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. Today's show would not be possible without the support of Champlain College and the support of M. Stoner. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education, branding, strategy, web design, and more. Higher Ed Live is sponsored by CHEG Enrollment Solutions. CHEG, the student hub, has recently published its first edition of a new publication designed specifically for today's busy enrollment managers. The Enrollment Services Digest includes great information about transfer and graduate recruitment, as well as in-depth research on student use of social media during their college search. And you can tweet at Social Admissions to be able to chat further with CHEG Enrollment Solutions. Admissions Live is sponsored by Welcome to College. Do you know if students are leaving your college visit with inspiration, not just information? A Welcome to College visit audit will reveal what your visitors are hearing and what they should be hearing. Contact Justin Bayer via Twitter at Welcome to College, and that's the number 2, Welcome to College, or email Justin at welcometocollege.com, this time T-O, for more information. So thank you so much to all our sponsors. Now I'm going to switch over to our actual show. I'm very excited to be able to talk with you today, Eliza, because I know we were both attending the AMC this year for NEACAC, which was a wonderful event hosted by the beautiful St. Anselm College. We had a wonderful time. But before we even get into the event, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your history in admissions, and also maybe your history with NEACAC?
Sure, yeah. So I graduated from the University of Vermont in 2012. I majored in elementary education. I was a tour guide, so I really did that traditional route of, being a tour guide in the admissions office and then switching gears over into the professional world of higher education. I'm entering into my 3rd year working at the University of Vermont. I travel to Connecticut, except for Fairfield County, and Minnesota. So two, very different territories, but it's, I'm really grateful to have that experience for sure. And I also oversee new employee training in our office. So that's something that I do, just for our office separately. My history with NEACAC has been wonderful so far. I began at Summer Institute in 2012. It was one of my very first experiences. I had just about a week under my belt until I went off to Assumption College for SI, which was awesome, and it was such a great way to become engaged with the profession and really network, because I had no idea what to expect. And then I went to NEACAC last year, and then went this year, and now I'm just really trying to become more involved, which I do talk about a bit later. So yeah, that's kind of my history with the world of admissions.
Fantastic. And I'm glad you mentioned Summer Institute too. Even though we may not be talking about it today, I really think that's a really valuable thing that NEACAC does, and I think some other ACACs are starting to do. And so it's a great way when you're going into the job. I mean, I think a lot of us have had that tour guide or student ambassador experience, and we know one side of it, but actually learning, what am I getting myself into? What is this industry? Yeah, all about. It's really important to get to know, and I think the faculty that run those programs are so well versed in the industry. So I'm glad you mentioned that too.
Yeah.
So did you have any particular goals going into the AMC this year? Anything in particular you wanted to focus on topics-wise? What did you kind of think about preparing to have?
Yeah, this year was so different than last year. Last year, I had some confidence, but I wasn't really sure, what to expect. I didn't know that many people yet. I knew the staff that I came in with, but I hadn't really gotten my feet on the ground in terms of networking and really how to be doing that successfully. So this year, my #1 goal was to network and really branch out and meet a ton of people. I also came in knowing a lot more people skills, so I had a lot more confidence, which I think really helps when you're trying to network and meet a lot of people. And NEACAC is so great because they really provide a lot of opportunities for you to be able to network during the conference. You know, there's so much downtime and entertainment that, you know, whether you're at a session or if you're listening to karaoke, either way, you're still making those professional connections, which is super fun. The other thing, my other goal for, you know, AMC this year was that I really wanted to broaden my horizons. You know, the first year I was really going to sessions that I was super comfortable with, you know, that I knew that I would be able to relate to. This year I decided to learn more about data. Like, I don't know anything about data collection. I know how to analyze it, but I don't know, you know, behind the scenes and different things like I think it's called pivot point or something like that. We learned about, you know, just different things like that that I hadn't really been exposed to yet. So my goals were to network and to challenge myself to think outside of what I'm comfortable with, which I think I accomplished, which is good.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I like that you had both the social goals and the learning experience goals, because I think that is one thing that, I mean, I'm biased because I've only really been to NEACAC and then to NACAC, so I've only got to see gigantic conference and then the smaller but still fairly large conference. But NEACAC does really well is that they balance out these fantastic sessions, and then, like you said, karaoke, and then bingo is massive.
Oh, bingo.
Yeah, and so it's good that you had kind of goals for either side of that and to take advantage of those. And yeah, data was huge. Did you see, I'm kind of jumping into the questions a little bit.
Yeah, that's fine.
Did you see any particular topics that seemed to stand out to you the most, that seemed extra popular this year? Like in past years, I know, you know, social media suddenly was a huge wave, and then, you know, there's been other things. So what stood out as kind of the biggest topics?
Yeah, gosh, there were so many. You know, kind of almost touching on social media again, texting students was such, you know, a topic that kept coming up in every session I went to, whether it had nothing to do with what we were talking about. It just seems like it's really becoming a hot topic along the profession, and it seems that there's really two sides of it. You know, some people really feel like that's very invasive to the students' lives. You know, we're already on them on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and emails and phones. You know, do we really need to add this other venue of contacting students? And then other people felt, you know, why not? This is how students are communicating. Why aren't we meeting them where they're at? Which I really can see the benefits of both. And it's interesting hearing how schools have really implemented that. And, you know, it's obviously student choice. So if a student wants that, then, you know, maybe we should be giving it to them. But how does that work logistically? I have no idea. That seems very overwhelming to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you know, I don't know how students would really feel about it. I guess we should probably just ask some students how they feel about it. Might be a really good place to start. But it's kind of cool that there's a lot of new companies that are coming out that, you know, provide that service. And, you know, I know like Hobson's and places like that also do the same thing. In terms of data, it seemed that a lot of schools are moving more to a system of really using data to analyze what high schools they should be visiting. I feel like there's been a shift in the profession from, oh, I travel to Connecticut, I'll visit every single school that I know about, which is great, but, you know, could we be more intentional to save money for the school, to be really targeting students that are competitive for the institutions that we're working for, and really using data to manipulate that was a really beneficial part. And UVM has really started doing things like that, but, you know, there's always more ways to really implement and integrate that into our process and into our territory management process. So those were two really big things that I really witnessed, but texting was really, like, everyone was talking about it, I felt like.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there, because I got to co-present on a session about social media, but texting came up in that conversation, where it's not quite in social, but it kind of is, and there's this, it really does bring a lot of ethical questions and a lot of, you know, I mean, timing questions too. When you're already doing so much, how do you do it? I think, you know, even the data piece came up as how do you do something well and effectively, and not just kind of spreading yourself all over every direction.
Right, and just hoping for the best results.
Exactly.
You know, I think being intentional is something that's really difficult, because we want to cast a really wide net. You know, we need to make sure that we're communicating with students that may not be seeking us out. However, there are lines that we need to draw and boundaries that we have, and, you know, how can we really walk that tightrope and make sure that everyone's comfortable with where we're at?
It's an important question to ask about it, and also to have to figure out how to do it in 160 characters on top of everything else.
Yeah. Good luck, social marketing team.
Exactly. Oh man, so that's great. I'm glad that you kind of saw these trends kind of keep popping up. I think one other thing I heard on top of those two that you mentioned was talking more and more about non-traditional students. I mean, there were sessions about veterans, there were sessions about, even just working with adult students in general, and there were big conversations that I think there's always been those topics, but it seemed to be more and more, and even more conversations about transfer students. Did you happen to notice that as well?
I did, yeah. I heard a lot of conversations around transfer students, undocumented students, students that have gone through the foster care system, which really provides a really interesting thing to think about, especially speaking about financial aid and educational resource spots. And it really seems like we're kind of shifting. I feel like college has become such a norm here in our country that now it's not so much, it's only for people that can really afford it. And, it's not so much of an elitist sort of thing as much as let's make it accessible for everyone. But there's a lot of people that we need to be differentiating for in our process so that we can make it accessible. If a student doesn't have internet access, which is still like a common thing, even though I feel like a lot of us may take it for granted. How can we be accommodating them and their needs and still make college a possibility and not get them hung up on those really small logistical things? So I noticed that was a really big conversation spot, was how can we be accommodating and how can we be meeting students' needs, not how can they be meeting our needs, which is a really important shift in mind, I think.
Absolutely, and I'm glad that was a topic that was coming up. I mean, we even talked about it, I forget how long ago now, but there was an Admissions Live episode that I got to do with Don Fraser talking about access in general, and there are these questions that, after you hear them, you think, oh yeah, that makes so much sense, but you don't think of it when you do take these things for granted, like, oh, all my students can, get these pieces of mail, all these students can work with the, be able to access our website, so that's great that was coming up in the conversation. You mentioned before that you said, was it last year that it was your first NEACAC AMC?
It was, yes.
Awesome. Did you participate in the First Timers program?
I did, yeah. I love the First Timers program. It was really low key, which I really appreciated because I didn't feel like I was really tied to the program, but I got a really great mentor, some really great mentorship opportunities out of that. And it was also a way to connect with people that are new in the field. I had that experience at SI, but it was really nice kind of a year later being like, okay, like I don't need as much hand-holding right now, but I want that kind of safety net, and having the First Timers lunch a little bit later in the conference was a really great way to kind of reflect and rejuvenate and really connect with other people that have been having a very similar experience that I had been. That being said, I really loved coming back as, as a more veteran part. I volunteered at this NEACAC, which was a really, wonderful experience. I worked at the registration table, which was a great way to kind of, dip my toes in the water of becoming a bigger part in the NEACAC organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an eye-opening experience, to say the least, to actually be on the organization end and trying to catch everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. It was crazy at points. There were some Russians there that came through.
Definitely. And I'm so glad that you got to share that experience with the First Timers last year. And I know this year, NEACAC, actually, the AMC had its largest group of First Timers ever. I think it was 140 or so.
So awesome. There were so many records that got broken at this year's AMC, which was really cool.
Definitely, yeah. I think it was most school counselors in attendance, most attendees, most first-timers. It was pretty amazing. I think donations were broken. So yeah, it was wonderful to see that. I think it's so important to see that it's growing. Even when we're having these conversations of doing things more effectively and doing things with a tighter budget, that there's still space to be able to send our organizations.
Yeah, and it seems like organizations are really seeing, going to these conferences and getting this exposure as a really positive thing for their staff members. And it's even I spoke to some schools that only had one representative, but to be able to use that representative in a really positive way and bring back information to the staff, I think is just as beneficial as having, some schools had 20 people that were there representing, so it really, it really goes to both sides. But I hope, hopefully either way, it's a really positive experience for both kinds.
Definitely. It seemed to be. I think a lot of people left happy and satisfied with what they gained from it. And actually, what you just said reminded me of another question. But I also want to make sure I say to viewers, if you have any questions for either of us, please feel free to tweet with the Hire Live hashtag, and we'll make sure to get to those. But your question reminded me of another question I wanted to ask, which was, how do you're going and you're attending these wonderful sessions, and you're getting all this information and taking notes, or sometimes people tweet out the things that they're learning. How do you as an organization, as a team, bring back what you've learned, and how do you share it and distribute that information? Because obviously, I know the UVM team is huge. I think you guys have like 50 odd people. Yeah. And so how do you get that out? How do you make sure that it's not just staying in your own space and your own notes, and you're making sure everybody else
So something that we do is at the first staff meeting that we have after our conference is, however many people went, or maybe a representative, or however we work at this, each time, we'll get up and talk and kind of give a little presentation about what the conference is about, especially for, our counseling staff really knows what NEACAC is, but maybe our operations staff isn't as aware of NEACAC's function within, this organization. So, they'll give a background and then talk about sessions and really big takeaways and trends that they notice, which is really helpful because it spurs on a larger conversation with our staff and talking about how can we implement these ideas into our staff. For instance, one of my colleagues went to a visits and events sort of conference a few weeks ago in Chicago, CIVSA, and she came back and did a really great presentation, and there were some things that I know that our marketing team took back from her presentation that they're going to try to implement here. So it really just goes to show, it's not just counseling staff that's going to benefit, or just operations, or just visits and events. Everyone can benefit from any conference. So we really try to work it that way. Something that we're thinking about trying to do is doing a bit more of a deeper debriefing, especially with the people that were at the conference. So really, coming together, what sessions did we go to, being a bit more intentional about those sessions, and really sharing those ideas, because if we don't do anything with them, all those notes that we take are just going to sit there. So, how can we be utilizing that knowledge to benefit our staff better is important to us.
That's wonderful, and I'm so glad that you guys make sure that you include other outside divisions and outside, not just the counseling team itself, because it's so true. It doesn't just benefit us; it benefits us as an organization. I know I had one of the sessions I attended on working with veterans. It just I had one of those light bulb moments of this shouldn't just stay with me. This needs to go much farther. So it's good that you already have kind of a method in place, and you're thinking about other methods to keep spreading that out, so that it doesn't just it can be so easy to attend a session, get so jazzed and so excited about the ideas you hear, and then let them fizzle out.
Yeah, I really feel like going to conferences is like professional soul food to me. I feel so rejuvenated and so inspired when I leave, but those feelings are temporary sometimes. You're all excited, like the car ride back, and you're talking to everyone about it, and then that deflates after a little while. So how can we keep that energy up and continue those ideas to be circulating in our office? So I think that there's so many great ways that offices, really harness that energy, but it's hard because we're busy, and other things come up and the conference ends and we leave the campus.
Yeah, it can be so easy for it to just kind of dissipate. That's wonderful, and I love that that quote that you just said. Conference is like professional soul food. That's just so perfect, because it's so funny. I mean, I think it's no secret to anybody who follows me on social media or knows me in person. I get so pumped about conferences, and that's exactly it. It's just it kind of feeds at that excitement you have for the industry. And what I love about our industry, and I've said this probably in the last 5 Admissions Live episodes, is that I love that we're so willing to share. I think that that's so huge in the industry, and I've talked to other people in other industries going to conferences, and they said, yeah, it's so rare that you actually hear another organization saying, this is what we're doing that's helping us to be so successful. Right. Yeah, and I think that that's so important.
Yeah, I think it's really the whole point. Even if we took away all of the sessions that we go to, I still think I would get so much out of a conference, just because people are not feeling like it's a competition. It's more like, how can we be helping?
Oh, think
I really like that aspect. Oh, hello? Are you there?
Yeah, you just went silent for a little bit. Can you just repeat the last thing you said?
Yeah, sure. I was just saying, how it's so not like a competitive atmosphere. It's much more of a supporting atmosphere, and really making sure that we're here for the students. We're really working to help them, and kind of grounding all of us to that place and helping each other to be better, which is really cool.
Definitely. Yeah, and it does all come back to the students, and I think that's why it's so great that you can see that everybody just wants to help each other, because we just want to help students make the right choice. That's what our job is all about.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned some of the sessions you went to. Can you mention some of the ones that stood out to you the most, or that you walked away with some of the best knowledge from? Or, I mean, if you want to recap quite a few of whatever.
Yeah, sure. Oh my gosh, I loved the sessions that I went to. So I went to the Common App session, which was really interesting, especially after such a challenging year with the Common App. One of the first things that Kirk, the presenter, said was, okay, last year was bad. Like, let's just, put it out there. And I think that that's really something that we can really all agree with as well. It was a rough year for the Common Application. But what I really appreciated about the presentation was that they owned it, first of all, which was really great. And that they really identified the issues that went wrong, and then they told us exactly how that's going to change. So it was really reassuring, I think, to the college side. The high school side seemed a little bit less trusting than the college side did. They're really, there was a lot of concern over paper applications. The Common App is still not really providing that. You can see now a print off of your application, but they can't fill it out on paper, which seems to be kind of a point of contention between the high school side and Common App, which I can really see both sides of that issue. But overall, it was great. It seems like they've really turned things around and are really going to work for a better year. So hopefully that'll make everyone a bit less stressed out, this coming fall, barring any issues that we'll have. So the Common App session was great, and it's always, a bit heated at points, which always makes it a bit more entertaining as well. I went to the session on data, which was really cool. Learned a lot of different ways to be using data differently and how to be more strategic in territory management, which I spoke about earlier. I went to a session on training new employees, which it's so great when, you have a very specific role in your office and there's a session that's going to line up exactly with that. And it ends up being a great session as well. So as a cherry on top was that it was awesome. The women that ran it were just they totally re-implemented a training program at Assumption, and had just kind of started from scratch. It was like a year turnover process that they worked through all of these issues, and they provided us with their Google Drives of the table of contents and their handbook and their schedule. So I walked away with resources, which is really, really helpful, that I can now take that and implement it here. I think our training program's great, but there's so many ways that it could be better, and this was a really great way for me to see how other schools do it, and try to apply that to a larger staff, which is kind of challenging. So it was really great learning about that. I went to one of my favorite sessions that I went to was a panel of taking different career paths in admissions, and how it doesn't have to be this traditional trajectory to move along in the profession. And there was people from both sides of the desk that were on the panel, and they all had very untraditional ways of getting to where they're at. And it was really inspiring, because they all are okay, and I think that there's a really strong trend in admissions where it's like, okay, well, when am I going to be moving up, or what should I be doing? I'm going to get my master's, and I have to keep progressing forward, and I can't get off that track. When you can, the reality is you can, and there are so many options, and there's so many transferable skills that we gain from counseling and from being in this profession that we can utilize in other ways, which can only help us later on in our career if we want to come back. So it was awesome. They just really, it was almost like everyone walked into the room with all of these questions about how to become VP of enrollment, and how to really skyrocket the career. And it felt like when everyone left the session, a breath had been taken, and it was like, okay, I don't really need a huge, career plan to be successful. I can really, do what I want to do, and do what I'm passionate about, and then apply that later on to other aspects. So that was really, really neat. kind of spin on things, I thought. And then one of the last sessions I went to was the getting involved in NEACAC session. I think NEACAC can feel really overwhelming to a lot of people. There's so many ways to get involved, but can I break into that group? Is it a friendly group? Do they want new people getting involved? There's all of those questions that really swarm around in people's heads. So I went to that session and learned that there's so many different ways to really, dip your toes in the NEACAC waters and really see, how you can be helping and networking. And it's just a really cool way to meet people who are just as passionate and enthusiastic about this profession. So if anyone hasn't filled out the survey for NEACAC, you should, because that's where you can sign up to volunteer and do other things. Little plug.
Yeah, I love it. It's a great plug.
So I'm really excited. Hopefully I can get more involved. I would love to be on the planning committee or do something like that, or be a first-time mentor would also be a really neat way to really get involved with that. So that's kind of a recap of some of the sessions that I really came away with so much information. I was looking through my notes when I was prepping today, and my gosh, I took like 10 pages of notes at NEACAC. I was like, I didn't feel like I was like really, writing that much, but I guess, when so many ideas are being shared at such a high speed, it's so hard to capture it all. And there's so much good knowledge that gets shared there that I feel like you can't miss anything. You always have to be like writing something down, or I have like quotes everywhere and book titles and articles that I need to be reading. And that's the point. That's what you want to walk away with. You have your own resources to pull from, which is really
absolutely cool. Yeah, you brought up so many great points within that whole recap. I love it. But no, I'm so glad that you walked away not just with knowledge, but with resources that you can access. I think that was a huge thing that takeaway has increased, I think, as the years have gone by, that people are willing to send out their sessions and share their Google Drives and do all the, have all these conversations after the fact. That's awesome. And the whole, being involved in NEACAC, it's funny that you were talking about being in the planning committee, because this year is my first time being on it, and it's so true. I think you get a little bit of validation, too, with your excitement for admissions. Yeah. Because you're like, oh, other people are just as excited about this as I am, and that's so refreshing. And it kind of gets into this wonderful sort of feedback loop of being involved in these events, and it's exhausting, but it's so fulfilling. And so I want to give that same plug that you mentioned, that, fill out the survey and make sure you write in there if you want to be involved. I actually got to, I don't want to talk too much myself, I want to let you keep talking because you're great, but I wanted to mention I got to be involved in it this year and got to help promote the NEACAC 2014 hashtag. And it was so rewarding to see. I think, we have this team of 50 people that are all doing all these different things to help make that conference happen, but to be at that conference and to see, what this person did and that person did and what we did as a team actually happen and work well, and see people happy at all these events is just, it's an experience that you can't put into words. And so so I do hope that people continue to express an excitement in being involved in that, because I know even my own small piece of doing the social media piece, it was so cool to watch that really spread and help spread NEACAC to others.
Yeah, the social media hashtag NEACAC 2014 was awesome. That was so, like, every session going in and seeing like the live tweets and the ideas that people were getting was almost another way of networking, and going to sessions that you couldn't go to, or were overlapping with other things that you wanted to be doing. That was just a really fun way to implement, a hashtag. That was so cool. That was like one of my favorite parts of the conference was like waiting to see your picture come up on the screen. I was like, oh my God, there we are.
Yeah, it was really cool. We were glad to get to use, I don't know if other viewers have used Tint Up before, but it was pretty cool. We got to do like the slideshow of tweets in real time and pictures. It was really fun to get to watch that and see other people take a picture, like you said, so that they could see it up there. It was a cool little plug, way to keep plugging that kind of social piece to it. So I'm glad you enjoyed that as well. Well, I want to make sure we keep covering all of our questions. We have so many. I guess I want to kind of look at the broader picture too of attending conferences, and this year you said you approached it with a very different kind of approach because you had already been there as a first timer and everything. So you mentioned some things that you did differently, but did you outreach to people any earlier than the conference? What did you do in kind of the weeks leading up to sort of get ready to attend the conference and to be able to take pictures with them?
Oh my gosh, it was so different. So I first connected with like my travel buddies, who's going, when are you getting there, where are you staying, all of that stuff was very important because it was almost like a family reunion of sorts, being able to see the people that you only get to see in the fall and a little bit in the spring. That was one of the first things I checked in on. The second thing was I went through all of the sessions. I like looked at what I wanted to go to and kind of kept my mind open to other things, but kind of set up my schedule of sorts in my head. And then one thing that I'm really glad I did, and I don't really know what made me think to do this, but I went through each session and I wrote down some questions that I wanted to get the answers to. It was, it took me like 5 minutes. It was super fast, but it was great because many of them got answered. And it was a really great way of saying, wow, this was a really successful session because I walked away with the knowledge that I didn't know before. Sometimes I feel like it's hard to gauge the success of a session, and that was a really great way for me to really know and evaluate how it went. And it was also nice because if they didn't get around to it, being able to bring it up it seemed beneficial for other people too, because it may not be things that we were thinking of in the present moment, and I probably wouldn't have thought about either unless I had had that, that foresight to be like, okay, I need to write this down and I'm thinking about it, so let me see if it comes up at the conference. So having those questions, and I came back with so many answers and so many more things that I didn't know about. So those were two things that I did differently. In terms of networking, I just went in like full force and just introduced myself to everyone and wanted to know everyone's story and what they do, in their office, and compare and contrast how our offices work. So that was something I did no really preparation for, except mental preparation. I was like, okay, I got to be, like super outgoing and really reach out to people so that, they know that I'm also open to having those conversations and making those connections and collecting business cards and things like that.
I love it. I thought that's a great tip. I've never really thought. I've gone to 6 or 7 NEACACs now and conferences in general. It's so smart to look at the sessions ahead of time and write down questions. I never, it seems to make so much sense when you think about it, but that's a really great way to make sure that it does achieve exactly what you hope to from that session. Even if, like you said, you don't get that question answered, at least it starts a conversation that you can continue afterwards too.
Right.
Yeah, I love that. And you really do. You have to kind of go in full force, ready to meet people and just be excited about it. It can be overwhelming and exhausting, and it sort of feels like, going back to orientation at college almost. You're like, I get this person, that person, and oh my gosh, I know you, and I haven't seen you.
You kind of have to think about it like everyone is in, the same boat. Like everyone's here at this conference. Like some people don't really have their colleagues with them. Some people have a ton, but we're all here to meet people and to learn new things and to come back being better professionals than when we showed up on campus. And it's the same thing, orientation. No one has friends, and everyone needs to meet people, and you're beginning an experience. So it was a really, really positive experience for me, for sure.
Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that, and I love hearing just the learning that happens between each time that you've had. I'd love to check in with you, a year from now when you've gone to your 3rd NEACAC and there's all these new ideas.
Already excited for Roger Williams University. Hashtag NEACAC 2015.
Yes, yes. So excited for hashtag NEACAC 2015. I can't wait to see just everything that happens to that conference.
I know. It can only get better, really.
Exactly. And so make sure I want to kind of also ask too, you've shared some great tips for conferences. Do you think if you were to attend, I know attending national conferences, there's a lot bigger conversation, and it can be harder, for certain people in certain roles to be able to attend those, earlier on in their years. But what kind of, it can be hard to talk so theoretical, but from what you've learned from regional conferences, what would you kind of take to that bigger stage? What approaches do you take? Because it is a different experience from this regional.
Oh my gosh, I know. I've never been to a NEACAC before, and that would be like a dream. I would love to go to a NEACAC, specifically one in San Diego would be awesome. No, I think it's almost like, what I would picture it to be like is really a regional conference just blown up, just like so big, and so many more sessions to choose from, so many more people from all over. I think something that I would really want to take advantage of is talking to people outside of New England. You know, things have to be different, I would assume, especially at really big schools, you know, like the, you know, University of Minnesota, University of Michigan. They have to be doing things so differently, and we don't have that scale of school here in New England, which I really love, but we can really probably learn a lot from schools that have to deal with things on a bigger basis, or even a smaller basis, depending on the size of, you know, the institution. So that's something I would really, you know, really want to be going in with, thinking about, I need to really branch out of the New England, you know, safety blanket and really learn from people that are outside of this region. I mean, who knows how things will change in our industry. And, you know, hopefully they could be learning something from our small town New England ways as well, which would be really cool. So that's something. I also know that, you know, at national conferences, a lot more international schools are coming. You know, schools from Canada I know will attend and things like that. And I would really love to kind of, you know, just pick their brain and see what's going on. Because it's kind of interesting, you know, we're really caught up with international admissions. That was another big hot topic I felt like this year. And, you know, our domestic students are their international students. So how, you know, how does that work for them? And what do they think, you know, and how does that process lead them? So that's something, but I would definitely always, every conference that I go to from now on, I will be going in with questions, because there's so much stuff that comes up, and maybe I wouldn't limit it to conference sessions anymore, just general questions about how do you do this? You know, especially it can also serve as a preformed like icebreaker, you know, like you don't really know what to talk to someone about. Oh, do you guys use Facebook? How do you use it? You know, that's such an easy way to chat with someone, and everyone's doing it pretty much. So that could also just kind of be a nice little comfortable thing to kind of have in your back pocket to reach out for.
Definitely. Well, it sounds like you're already well prepared if the opportunity comes along.
Yes, I'm ready.
You're ready. I love it. So I want to make sure I'm cognizant of your time, and I think we're kind of wrapping it up a little bit, but I would love to know, you know, we just talked about NEACAC 2015, hashtag NEACAC 2015 at Roger Williams, and, you know, what do you hope to see next year at the conference? What topics you already saw, like starting, little seedlings? I mean, you mentioned texting, maybe we'll see a session on that next year. What are other topics you hope to see next year?
I would love to see a session on people that have been tour guides and are moving into a professional, you know, role within the admissions office. I think that can be a really challenging transition for a lot of people. You know, age can be really hard when you're, you know, young. Parents are like, you look like you're my kid's age, you know. How can I be looking at you as someone of authority and that I should be trusting with my student's future? You know, just going into a professional environment, what are the nuances that go along with that? And how do I really transform myself into a respected member of the staff and not just a grown-up tour guide? And I think that that's a really important thing. So that's something that I would love to see at NEACAC 2015. You know, I think that's a really popular thing. There's a lot of young people in our profession that are going through that, you know, even if they didn't work in admissions before. So how can we be working with each other? And then the other thing that I would love to see is a session that's more of an open forum between the high school side and the college side. I think that there's a lot of things that we could be doing to help each other make things easier, especially in the fall. You know, do you want us calling you in August to schedule visits? Is there a better time that, you know, would work for you? Simple things like that that we could just be conversing about and making our lives a little easier. And, you know, that could just be one person from a staff going and bringing back that information. Just a sharing way of talking with high school counselors, because when we're, you know, talking with on the phone, it's, you know, early action season and we're reading a ton of applications and trying to get all through that. So how can we be, you know, just more, you know, aware of each other's needs and how to accommodate those?
Definitely. I love that idea, because I do think we need to open those conversational gates a little bit more and be able to make sure we can ask and not just keep going with the status quo, but figure out what actually works better for each other. And I think we're in a good space that it's a little bit easier to do that. I don't know if you're in the Facebook group, the College Admissions Counseling Facebook group. It's like 5,000 people. It's,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's huge. Wow. So I try to put a plug out there for it every now and then. But you know, if you're watching this show, whether you're on the school counseling side or the enrollment side, you should definitely check it out, because people post all sorts of conversations and articles and questions in there, and it's just such a good place for feedback. And yeah, I'd love to see that in real life too at these conferences it can definitely be one-off, but it'd be nice to have sort of a recognized space for it. I think the college fair is a good way to kind of start those conversations, but you can be a little bit more in your sort of your zone of, I need to talk about UVM or whatever.
Yeah, I need to talk about this. Someone needs to hear this. Yeah, I completely agree.
Exactly. Well, that's fantastic. I guess just kind of wrapping up, you know, and you've already shared some great advice, but, you know, if you wanted to talk directly to somebody who's going to be attending their first regional conference like NEACAC next year, what kind of advice would you give to them?
I would say, you know, have an open mind. You know, go to a session that you have no idea what it's about, and you have no clue what they're talking about. You will learn something that you'll be able to take away. Even if you can't really apply it into your everyday work, it's, you know, something that you can be aware of and maybe learn about if you want to change schools or something like that. So I think having an open mind is really, really important for going to conference. Take advantage of the entertainment. Some of the best networking I did was not sitting in a session. You know, it was listening to the Lost articles and meeting someone that also travels to Connecticut that, you know, sometimes we're a few tables down, but we never get to chat. So those are really, really important times, and you'll be really tired, but it's totally worth it, I think. So I think, you know, put away like, oh, I'm going to be so tired, I have to wake up early. Doesn't matter. You only go to NEACAC once a year, so you might as well take advantage of that space, and really, it's also just a lot of fun too. So that would be my second piece of advice. And my third is ask questions and speak up. My first conference at NEACAC, my biggest regret was not asking a lot of questions and not really contributing to the conversation. I wasn't really sure what I had to offer. Coming in this year, I was a lot more confident, but you have something to offer no matter if it's only your first month in admissions or if you've been in the, you know, field for over 30 years. So I think, you know, kind of putting yourself out there, nothing's a dumb question. Everyone is thinking, you know, a lot of the things that you are. So, you know, you can be the one to speak up and really make that conversation shift to what you want to know about.
I think that's fantastic advice, and I think taking that advice can help others to love the conferences just as much as we do.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing, you know, sharing everything you learned and sharing your own advice. I do hope that others will take it and kind of run with it in the future at conferences.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
Oh, my pleasure. And I want to make sure I mention, oh my goodness. Come back here. There we go. Like I said, thank you, and thank you to UVM for letting me steal you away for a few minutes of your day. Thank you, as always, to our program sponsors, M. Stoner, Chegg, and Welcome to College. Coming up next on Higher Ed Live tomorrow, Ryan Catherwood speaks with a panel of assistant and associate directors of alumni relations to talk about reunions. You can get reminders about this and other great shows by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. You can browse the archives at higheredlive.com or subscribe to the Higher Ed Live podcast on iTunes. I'm Nikki Lentine, back next month for more Admissions Live. Thanks, everybody.